Hi there, welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. With me tonight, as always, my good friend Drew Crawley. Drew, what's up, man?
Howdy, sir. Doing well. Spent the weekend playing a little bit of music. Uh, did the Halloween parties circuit over this weekend as we were recording. Spent some time with our mutual friend Lorenzo,
Yeah.
celebrating his birthday today, and then found out I have another round of COVID. So, little in the dumps. Morale is a little low around the residence today, but I'm excited to spend the evening with you and drink some whiskey with our friend.
Yeah, you know what's good for morale is drinking whiskey that not only was made by Lenny, but drinking it with Lenny. We have
Indeed.
Lenny Eckstein from Deerhammer Distilling with us tonight, and I've got the uniform on. I told him I could be an employee now because I got the hat, I got the flannel shirt. We could be twins, Lenny.
Yeah, right.
But Drew, you're talking about music. You had a single come out recently, Palomino.
Indeed. Yep,
Tell
Palomino
everybody about that.
it's out in the world. Anywhere that you listen to music, Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, whatever. We've been fortunate enough to get some radio play, but more than anything, this song came out of a time where I was just struggling in a lot of relationships in my life with my mom, with my now fiance, then girlfriend, with my best friend, with my brother, and just was really feeling pretty overwhelmed. And so took some time to journal some of those thoughts out, and that time turned into a piece of art that I'm really proud of. So it's a good one for me, some therapy in there a little bit, but I'm really proud of it. And I hope that you guys will go and check that out wherever you listen to music.
Yeah, it really is a very good song, and everybody that I've heard from that's listened to it has had very good things to say about it. It really is kind of a next step for you, I think, as a songwriter. So congratulations with that. Really proud
Thank you
of
very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So we want to get in with Lenny here in just a minute, but before we do that, we want to tell you about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends who make content for the whiskey enthusiast in you. We have Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson, where they'll talk with distillers from across the country, around the world, about distilling techniques, unique grains, you name it, they get into it. Lenny's been on that show before, and he was fabulous. So be sure to check that out. My Whiskey Den every Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central Time. We have Pat and Mike and Mitch. They're talking about all kinds of great things in terms of craft whiskey, because on My Whiskey Den, craft whiskey is king. The newest member of the Bar Cart Co-op is Whiskey in My Wedding Ring with David Levine. David is a great whiskey writer and reviewer. He has some wonderful shows on his podcast where he interviews some of the people just like we do. So be sure to check him out. He's a lot of fun. Alan Bishop also has a couple other shows. One is called One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. If you are a distiller, whether you are distilling legally or in your backyard underneath some sort of covering to protect yourself from the revenuers, you can still email Alan and ask him a question, any question you got, and he will post a YouTube comment with an answer to that question. Really interesting stuff. And he also has a very interesting show, talking of interesting. If you have ghosts, you have everything, where, some of this gets into the spirits world, and some of it is in the spiritual world. Some of it's talking about some supernatural things, UFOs, Bigfoot, that kind of stuff as well. So be sure to check that out. I believe that shows up on Spotify. And one more thing about our show.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit that bell notification to find out when new episodes are coming out, which do come out every single Wednesday on all of the services: Spotify, Apple Music, Google, maybe Amazon, definitely YouTube. And always hit that like button, but hit it an odd number of times, so then that way it stays as a like.
Thanks a lot, Mike. We appreciate your contribution to the show, as always. So what we're doing tonight is a little bit different. We're really happy to have Lenny back on. And I'll say this. I think we've done 2 whiskey of the year kind of shows, and I think every year something from Lenny's been in the finalists for us, if not winning something from us. And this year, I can tell you right now, with something that we're trying tonight, it will be no different. He makes some great product, and one of the things that I truly enjoy about Lenny is he's not afraid to try anything. And that's a great lesson for all of us, is don't be afraid to try something new and different, and just see what happens. And so tonight we're going to be talking with Lenny not only about whiskey, but we're going to be talking with him about music from his home state, and also music from the current state where he lives. So Lenny, welcome back to Bourbon Turntable, man.
Thanks, Kevin. Good to see you guys. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to sample some Deerhammer bourbon that you sent to us. And I believe this is 100 proof, but not necessarily bottled in bond. Is that right?
That's right. And, I could certainly talk a good bit about it. But what I will tell you is, our bourbon, it's been an evolution. And to your point about, kind of a hallmark of Deerhammer in terms of approaching everything with kind of an experimental approach, always evaluating what's out there and what has existing merit, but what we could try to bring to the table. Our bourbon and our rye, we went pretty left to center about, I think our first batch was maybe 8 years ago. We started distilling initially in 2011, making single malt, but the bourbon, some of our older stock that's currently at the, maybe 6 or so year mark, it's got a real dark, roasty, smoky note. And what you're tasting now represents kind of an intentional flavor drift towards a newer flavor profile that we're working towards. I've been enjoying this batch a lot. You're tasting something a little higher than our standard bottling proof, which currently goes out at 88 proof, but by next spring, we're going to bump that up to 100 proof.
Okay.
Awesome.
So while we sip on this a little bit, remind everybody, because we've had you on before, we talked about this in a little bit of detail, but remind everybody what your background is, where you grew up, and how you came to be a distiller and owning your own distillery.
Yeah, totally. So I grew up in Philadelphia, and spent, growing up, school, high school, college, and I went to school at the University of Arts right in the middle of the city. And it's kind of a crash course in growing up, because there was no real campus per se. It was just, hey, you lived in your parents' house. Now you live right in the middle of a city, and a gritty city at that, So it was a pretty cool exposure at the time. Again, went to art school and, spent 4 years in visual arts, and ultimately got into more of the commercial side and graphic design and a lot of branding. And, from there, I was looking to mix things up and look for adventure maybe a bit. And I found myself working my way west, and ultimately I found myself in Denver, and, continued down the path of graphic design, but was slowly finding myself drawn to things that were a little less digital, like less ones and zeros, less screens, less keyboard, less mouse clicks. And I was, being in Colorado in the early 2000s, craft beer was blowing up. It was, the Great American Beer Fest was happening in Colorado. The Homebrewers Association was based in Boulder. And I came to discover a homebrew shop that was a few blocks from my office, and really got immersed into, the craft of homebrewing, which, as most listeners know, brewing beer at home, very legal, distilling at home, for the most part, very illegal. But, spend enough time in one area and you let your curiosities go enough. And for me, it was the case of not having such a love for bourbon or any other with scotch, anything, just knowing that it's what I would do a shot of if somebody put in front of me.
Yep.
And I felt like I was missing out. I don't like missing out on things. So I took it upon myself to cultivate a taste and really just affinity for the distilled side of things. And then I just decided I had to start making it. And I decided I had to start a distillery. So, yeah.
Well, we're glad that you did.
Most definitely.
Okay, so one thing that I notice when I'm drinking your stuff is the nose in it doesn't really come alive till I've had a sip of it. And I don't know if that's just me or if that's what the reason for that is. But after I took a sip of this bourbon, the nose just kind of really got more pronounced.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I could see that. I mean, similarly, you know, folks, I'm in my rack house right now, and folks come in all the time, like, God, it smells good in here. I'm like, you know, I don't even really notice it, but sometimes I do. Maybe it's the same thing with sipping and a few things worth noting about this bourbon. Like I said, you know, our approach is always let's try something a little bit different. Let's go a little left to center. It's 4 grain, and it's comprised of Colorado grown grains, Colorado corn, wheat, oats, and chocolate malt. It's matured exclusively in heavy toast, number 2 char, new oak. You know, it's sour mashed, it's open fermented for 4 days, and double pot distilled is a big deal. You know, a lot of craft distillers using pot stills, but I do think that that's of the various things that could impact flavor and lend a certain note to a final product. You know, pot stills are a big one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that common thread, like you mentioned, that's kind of that roasted corn note is like a baseline, but it's very much, I feel, brighter than some of the other things that we've had from you and your bourbon expressions, where I don't know if it's, you know, my palate's a little bit off or whatever, but it's kind of a stone fruit, like a white peach, or like a citrus fruit, like a blood orange or a grapefruit, somewhere in that family. Kind of that brighter citrusy stone fruit note comes through quite a bit on the nose, and then really carries through on the palate. Almost like a candied citrus towards the end too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I never quite would have called that out. I do notice that as you're saying it, like towards the end of the palate, and maybe right before the finish kicks in. Yeah, that's an interesting note. It's you know, something I've noticed as our stores of whiskey have gotten older, and this one is comprised of some of our oldest bourbon, and then nothing younger than 3 years. But while we typically don't pull anything younger than 4 years, I really like what some of this 3-year stuff is doing, especially some of the batches that are higher in oat content, which really like you know kind of lend that nice softness and texture to it. But I guess more to my point, I'm noticing that like the organic acids that are imparted that really bloom after a few years, and I see it at the 3 to 4 year mark, I get like some, be it our bourbon or definitely the single malt, some like citrus notes, almost like tangerine, or sometimes like a creamsicle note. So just our house flavor of sorts. Yeah,
and that chocolate note just settles in really nicely in the finish, and it just kind of lingers there after everything else starts to drift away. I still get that little bit of chocolate in it. It's really, really, really pleasant.
Yeah, that's a fun one. You know, it's the specialty malt, you know, and when I think a lot of listeners might know this, but in the brewing industry, you would call it specialty malt. Maybe we call that in distilling too, but it's so commonly used in beer, where you take malted barley, or it could be other malted grains, but you know, they're kilned or they're roasted to darker colors, and they can impart those chocolate or coffee flavors, or like raisin or honey. And you know, it's a tool in beer to bring out subtlety and complexity, and I think it was overlooked for a really long time in distilling. And I feel like I was part of the beer geek, you know, turned distiller, you know, aspect that brought some of that in. And I'm stoked that other distillers are doing that. You know, like it seems like New Riff is messing with it. And even I was talking to some folks from Jim Beam, and they were talking about, you know, incorporating some specialty malts in some of their experimental products at their smaller distillery now. So
it definitely makes a difference. And it may only be a small percentage of the mash bill, In some places, it's a larger percentage, like at Chattanooga Whiskey. I think everything they do is at least 25%.
Oh yeah.
Some sort of malt. But it does make a difference in both in the flavor and in the texture, the viscosity of what you're drinking, I think.
That and I think, I like to champion oats a lot. I feel like they're slept on grain, and
Yep.
I've had folks ask like, well, like, what does it really do? And my answer is like, it does Honey Nut Cheerios, but in the right proportion, it's just a nice characteristic, and it really stands out.
Now, you had mentioned that you were changing your base proof, your standard proof in your batch releases to 100 from 88. And I'd seen a social media post where you talked a little bit about that. Share with people how you settled on 88 to begin with and why you're looking at changing to 100.
Yeah. So it was a long time ago, it feels like. So I don't know if my memory is exactly accurate, but at the time, I feel like, rewind 8+ years ago, and I think like trends were different, and, the landscape, in terms of what was on the shelf was different. Of course, there were bottled and bond offerings and cast strength offerings, but I don't know that, the bourbon enthusiasts' cravings were as high proof as they are now. And maybe while we kind of sat there at 88, which, I think for like a pot distilled bourbon, you can get away with 88 proof or even lower sometimes. Whereas, other techniques might not allow for that because there's so much flavor that comes through. It can hold up at lower proofs. It seemed like the right thing to do. Also, we're a small distiller, and we always kind of thread the needle with, the fact that we're really only, I say we can make 1 barrel a day. We could probably make more. It would just be hectic. And 1 barrel a day is kind of enough. We only make so much. So at the time, there might have been some pragmatic aspect to like, well, if it's 88 proof, maybe we'll have a little bit more.
Sure.
There's that. But at this point, I don't care. It's come down to like, it's got to be what we feel it should be. And it's been a few years that I wanted to bump it up. But I hate this part of the industry, but as like cost of glass bottles goes up, shipping goes up, grain goes up, the cost of running our stills because, natural gas goes up. It all costs more. At some point we have to raise our prices, and I don't want to raise our price on an 88 proof bottle. So I feel like if we're going to raise the price, might as well raise the proof too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but yeah, it's the practicality of it.
Yeah.
Barrels are getting more expensive and more difficult to get to. So yeah, but as long as you feel like you're getting something worthwhile, and not what Beam tried to, like 3 or 4 years ago, tried to raise the price of Booker's from $50 to $100 overnight, and that kind of was met with as there should have been, and you weren't getting anything else for it. It was just, we're going to double our price because we think we can. But,
we're not even bumping our prices up much. It's just like, if you ever want to start a podcast about the most boring things in the distilling industry, I'm happy to chime in about like distributor relations and line pricing things and all that. But it really comes down to, we're just trying to simplify, and, maybe, whether it's 98 proof or 102 proof, like they're all good, but I do like 100. It's sweet spot. It makes an easy conversion to bottle to bond. So, it's kind of our take. Bourbon, rye, they're both bumping up.
So in your rick house right now, what do you have? What's the oldest stuff that you have in there?
With regards to like more than a barrel or two, the oldest stuff is 7 years.
Okay. Wow.
The majority is, I don't know what the majority is, but I would say like the majority of what we're pulling is 4 years. We'll occasionally dip into some of the older stuff, but we use that as more of a seasoning component, like, 10% of the total blend of barrels.
Do you have plans for those older barrels, or they're just kind of keeping them around to like you say, season some of the batches that you do?
Yeah, kind of the latter, but I have some ideas. Nothing's definitive. One of the nice things about being very small and not having to sell and launch a product across the country or across the world is that, like we can make some pretty quick things happen. So,
Right.
For example, I've got I've got some ideas for some collaboration efforts with some of the older stock that might not, maybe it takes 4 months to bring it to fruition. But in the meantime, it's fun to sip on and see how it's progressing and where it's going.
Yeah. One thing is I've just sat here and enjoyed the nose on this bourbon. Those chocolate oranges that you get?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The ones that break open.
Yeah. That's
it's such a weird candy, but you're spot on though. That's such a distinctive
man. Because the other dangerous thing about Deerhammer whiskeys is once I start, it's very difficult to stop or to move on to anything else. So you kind of get in that lane and start pushing the accelerator just a little bit with each pour. But it's very creative, ingenious stuff. So
I think one of the things that I find really rewarding about distilling, or there's a lot of things, but I mean, one of them is that you can't, like, there's no winning. There's no being the best per se. It's like a never ending, like a lot of artistic endeavors or a lot of endeavors in general. You're always climbing this hill. And I like that, I don't think we get worse. I always try to be better, but also one of the tenets of like what we're after is to always be that surprise of sorts. And if someone's had Deerhammer already, maybe they're not surprised. But if they haven't, our bourbon might not hit everyone the way they expect it to. And sometimes, people like kind of, if they're very, very into like a more traditionalist approach or a Kentucky style bourbon, which I'm a huge fan of, it might catch them off guard. But circling back to your point, if you give it the time to, to contemplate and think like, well, wait, what is going on here? Like, what is the merit? Like, what is these flavors are different. That's all okay. We lean it way into the baking spice notes and, some of those fruit notes that come through.
Yes.
Sometimes in some ways it's sweeter up front and drier in the back versus, sweeter on the back in a more traditional style. So it's fun playing with all those components. Surprising people, I guess.
You also mentioned that you're having an intentional flavor drift with your bourbon. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, when we first decided, hey, let's open up our, offerings beyond American single malt, which we did. We really designed the distillery around. Like we had to bring in new equipment to make bourbon, and it was challenging. And in fact, it's still challenging. We're still better set up to make American single malt than we are grain in American whiskeys like bourbon or rye. But when we first started, again, like rewinding back to, it certainly wasn't the beginning of craft distilling by any means. I mean, it's well documented to some of the originals and experimentations that were happening forever ago, but it was when craft distilling was blowing up. And at the time, I think I kind of went through or all of us at Deerhammer went through a, who knew or who knows, like we didn't know what the landscape was going to develop into. So our approach was like, let's go way left of center. Let's like flip this on its head. And we decided we were going to do, I mean, it's still a 4-grain bourbon. We didn't change the grain bill per se, but we were doing a hickory smoke on the oats as a component. And the chocolate malt was a very high proportion of the grain bill. And it had a dark roastiness and like a smoky component. We realized real quick, like you can do a smoked bourbon, but that's not what everyone's after necessarily. Like you're definitely gonna cut your slice of the pie real thin if you're only gonna find those who want to experiment like crazy in their flavors. So after a few years of that, we realized like, hey, maybe we should like get a little closer to the mark and stop messing with what people hold as like such a true not true, but like just something that's so important to them. And so we drifted a little closer to center. Now it's a mix of those two. And well,
I've got some older Deerhammer bourbon around the house, so I will have to do a side by side on that. That'll be very interesting. Try that out. But very cool. Very cool. Well, we're going to pour some rye, and as we're doing that, one of the things we're going to talk, like I said, we're going to talk about music-wise, is talk about the bands from Lenny's home state of Pennsylvania. Then a little later, we will talk about bands from the state of Colorado as well. So let's pour some rye and enjoy that a little bit. But one of these are, what I did to come up with this list of bands is I Googled bands from Pennsylvania. Okay. And I kind of went down the list and pulled some that I thought were the more interesting to talk about. They may or may not be any of our favorites. They may or may not be ones that we're all that familiar with, but we'll have fun with it anyway. The first one was Joan Jett. And, she is, I think she's 68 now or something like that. But she is from Wynwood, Pennsylvania. You know where Wynwood is, Lenny?
I sure don't.
Yeah, I don't either. I probably should look that up, but
never heard of it.
Yeah, and we all know Joan Jett, obviously. She's no sleeper, but I had no idea she was from Pennsylvania. That's it's kind of awesome.
Yeah,
I'm
getting distracted by the nose of this, by the way.
Oh yeah. And real quick before I give you my rundown on Joan Jett, this rye. So something we do quite often is we'll harvest barrels for a batch and either harvest more than we need intentionally or harvest more than we need because the flavor profile of adding one more barrel and then one more barrel is just really where I like the blend to be. And when I say more than we need to, that is to say, I would prefer it not to sit in bottles for, let's say, 3 months because it could be in the barrel for 3 more months. So I try to have on hand what we need for distribution, which we're actually in the middle of ramping up right now, but we'll return that vatted blended product to the barrel. Sometimes at its original proof, sometimes proof down to around 100. So that's what you're getting in this rye is a rye that we actually bottled, I want to say like at least 8 months ago, if not a year ago. But what I pulled for you was right out of the barrel that it continued to mature in. So that's our rye batch 7, I think. Okay. But it's right out of the barrel for an extra almost year.
Okay.
So it's, again, Colorado grains, Elbon rye, which is a different strain of rye than what's typically used, but it grows well in Colorado, particularly in the San Luis Valley. That's about an hour and a half from here. Oats that are pretty high in the percentage, and then chocolate malt.
I love it. So you got rye, oat, and chocolate malt.
Yeah.
No corn.
No corn. Yeah. Again, like
there's
so many good ryes out there, but man, like I'll let them do that and trying to find other like paths to walk down. And this is another one where we started making this in the same year that we started making the bourbon. It like we missed the mark a few times in our first year of production, but I really like where it's going now. And this is comprised of some of my favorite of the oldest generation and my favorite of the newer generation. Again, nothing under 3 years, but most of it's in the 4-year mark with a little bit of like 5 to 6 year sprinkled in.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, the color on it is absolutely gorgeous. It's that really rich, like copper, almost like an amber color, which I love. But the balance of the rye and the oats is just gorgeous. It's this just dance almost. So Elbon rye, is there a distinctive signature, flavor profile for that one that you could speak to? Because this is not a rye that I'm familiar with. It's not a rye profile that I recognize.
Yeah. Well, I've never distilled that. I've never distilled our rye in 100% batch of rye. It's always been with these other grains. So I guess I'd be a little like off base if I just threw my take on it. It's not a pure scientific take, I guess, is to say that. Sure. But I do notice that it's less like there's less black pepper notes than I get off of a lot of other ryes that are like utilizing a German strain. It is a bit grassy, but it's not the grassiest. I get minty notes off of it. It kind of has like a bit of an alfalfa note, I guess, grass. But I like how it plays with the the baking spice notes that come through from, to some extent, the toasted oak, the specialty malt, and then how it plays off of the oats, which again, I kind of hinted this earlier. I noticed that like any batch that we do with a higher amount of oats than normal, I get like this screaming honey nut Cheerio flavor, which is just like this sweet, kind of cereal note. It's
and I'm not a baker, so I don't know if vanilla is a common ingredient in oatmeal cookies. But if you put vanilla in oatmeal cookies, I get that.
I don't know if it's vanilla that I've seen, but I do really like and conjure in my mind when I drink this, and I haven't seen them in years, but there's like oatmeal cookies that are about, I don't know, like the size of like, I don't know, maybe 3-inch diameter. They have like a white glaze on top.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not like high quality baked goods, but they're so tasty.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh,
it's wonderful, man. Wonderful. That minty note kind of comes through on the back end, like as I breathe out on a finish. There's that little reminiscent thing.
Yeah.
Definitely the oatmeal.
Yeah,
like freaking good, man.
Always got like kind of a Girl Scout Thin Mint cookie note on this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do that.
Really good. Now, we'll come back to this in a second, but Joan Jett.
Oh yeah, Joan Jett.
Sorry. Yeah. Where were we? Yeah, Joan Jett.
I mean, I was just gonna say before we jumped into the rye, like, just when I saw your list, Kevin, my thought was like, okay, I had a few that popped into my head, but then I had to kind of look her up and like look at some of the songs that I totally forgot about.
Yeah.
And I probably have I think we all have favorites from everyone, but man, Bad Reputation, such a good song.
Yes.
I love the kind of how it kind of pulls more of a like almost a punk side to it than the rest of her stuff. It's classic.
She is 65 years old, and Wynwood, Pennsylvania is northwest of Philadelphia.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. It's a township, so I'm imagining it's kind of a small town. But
maybe working towards the Poconos.
Yeah, maybe. But her first band was called the Runaways, and they had the song Cherry Bomb, if you remember that. Cherry Bomb. Anyway, I'll spare you my vocals on it. But probably her biggest song was I Love Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
And I Hate Myself for Loving You, which Sunday Night Football co-opted with what's her name? The leggy girl that was married to Tim McGraw. What's her name?
Faith Hill?
Yeah, Faith Hill. Yeah, she originally sang the Waiting All Day for Sunday Night, which is to the tune of I Love Rock and Roll. And then Carrie Underwood has done it for the last several years. So they ruined that song, but still a good song. And she's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as she should be. And I'd forgotten about this, but she did a movie with Michael J. Fox called Light of Day. Have you ever seen it?
I have not.
Nope.
Oddly enough, it's about two people in a band, trying to see if they can make it or not. But it's not a bad movie. And I remember, I think it came out in mid 80s, like 87 or something. And so anyway, Michael J. Fox showing off his guitar skills as he did in Back to the Future. And of course, Joan Jett breaking into acting. So pretty good. 9 Inch Nails started in Pennsylvania.
No idea.
Trent Reznor.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any thoughts?
They're scary. No, I love 9 Inch Nails. Obviously, super, super creative. I don't want to take anything away from you, Lenny, but they are one of the first bands that I ever heard that uses synthesizers and software, programming and production as a secondary instrument. I grew up in kind of the country and Western background and things like that. And it was play it straight to tape, only the instruments in the room, all that kind of stuff. And then I remember hearing some 9 Inch Nails stuff where I was like, holy crap, what is that? And it's Trent Reznor obviously is a composer. He scored several films and
Mhm.
I believe won a couple of nominations for his composition work for scoring. But he was the first person that actually I heard use synthesizers and Pro Tools as an instrument in and of itself. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I thought it was. I had no idea. He had Pennsylvania roots, but also like I thought it was so interesting that when they started coming to prominence, I mean, maybe in a way like a lot of bands, but like they were more not niche, but like they were like more underground, didn't necessarily appeal to the broader audience. But all of a sudden, like it seemed like you Drew jokingly said they're scary. I feel like maybe they were for a lot of folks, but they somehow broke through and then got that radio play and I mean exploded. Pretty impressive.
Yeah. They were one of the first bands in the genre called industrial rock, which I think is more towards rock music with the synth built into it, and like you were talking about, Drew. But really creative stuff. Not necessarily a band that I go to often, but there are some of their songs like "Into the Void." I think is a fantastic song. But mostly it's Trent Reznor. I think Atticus Ross, who had collaborated with him quite a bit, became an official band member. But basically, it was Trent doing everything until they went on tour, and then he would put together bands and for touring purposes. But a very unique band in American music for sure. Speaking
Head Like a Hole.
Yeah. What's that?
No.
Yes.
Head Like a Hole.
Yes. Yeah.
Great tune. And then I know this is common knowledge at this point, but Trent Reznor did write one of Johnny Cash's greatest hits in Hurt.
Yes.
So can't let that go without being mentioned.
And also, I could be mistaken on this, but I'm pretty sure he went on record to say like that's his song now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
How cool.
Yeah. Yeah. He's very cool. Another Philly band, The Roots.
Classic.
Yes.
The Roots. So like Joan Jett and some others that were like maybe I was in elementary school, that was almost like a soundtrack. The Roots were like my college soundtrack. Like before when they were first coming up, they would show up everywhere. They would show up at like the coffee shop down the street from me, just like
that's so
freestyling
cool.
in the middle of the room. It's those guys are amazing.
Yeah, I have some friends that went to University of Georgia down in Athens when back in the early '80s, and they saw REM like that. Which I'm very very jealous of. But that kind of experience is very cool. So the experience you had with the Roots, what was that like when you just like see them playing anywhere around town?
It was like, well, so like for one thing, I think like the hip hop scene in New York was always like overshadowing Philadelphia because New York overshadows Philadelphia. It's like an hour-ish away, and
right.
But it's way more prominent. The Roots coming up was something that in my early 20s and all my friends, we were like, first off, blown away, but also like kind of latched onto as like a point of pride. And whenever we were excited if we ever came across anyone in their band that might we might cross paths with or see them sitting in with another band, which happened frequently. It was I mean it was an amazing experience. And like there was always it doesn't exist anymore, but one of the venues we used to go to a lot, the Trocadero, like you'd go see a band and they just show up before that band.
That's so cool.
It was amazing.
Well, now they're prominent for being Jimmy Fallon's house band, which seems a little bit like a waste, but it certainly brought them into the mainstream and got everybody a chance to get exposed to them and their music, and Questlove and his personality.
But even like those bits, I don't know what to call them, the like musical kind of interlude, like impromptus where they'll cover a song and have like various instruments and bring everybody in
Yeah.
on it that they do on that show. I feel like
Yeah.
that was a really neat way to expose people to, what was underground hip hop, but now is very mainstream, and
Yeah.
maybe their whole body of work was just fucking phenomenal and
Yeah.
had such an
Absolutely.
evolution from the beginning to where they are
Mhm.
now.
Yeah. It's
But
a
yeah,
very, very unique brand of music. The way
Yeah.
it fuses jazz and hip hop to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Very
then
good.
real instruments and yeah.
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 They've got some really cool stuff out on YouTube during this SAG after strike, when obviously late night wasn't happening. They did some touring,
Mhm.
and they still got it. But there's some great stuff on some Kendrick Lamar albums that they've done. I think on
Yeah.
Good Kid, Mad City and To Pimp a Butterfly both. They had some
Cool.
of the instrumental jazz tracks on that. They're just so stinking creative.
Yeah.
It really is incredible.
Yeah. And one of the and I just thought of this, one of the best bits on Fallon, and I don't watch a lot of late night TV anymore, but because I'm old and fall asleep. But when they do the have musicians on and they do cover their songs playing with like toys.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
and the band just incorporates all sorts of different things to create the sounds that become the music for a song that everybody knows.
Mhm.
It's a very unique talent.
Yeah.
And their sousaphone player is certainly not his real name, but he goes by Tuba Gooding Jr. So you gotta hand it to the guy for having that kind of clever pun sense of humor.
Good.
Okay, so Lenny, you're talking about seeing the Roots out and about when you were in Pennsylvania and in college, and anybody else that you were aware of that we ought to bring up?
Yeah, there's a few.
Yeah.
Let's see. So Ween, I feel like has to be in the list. They're from very close to where I grew up.
Ween?
Yeah, Ween. G Love and the Special Sauce. Gotta be in the mix.
Well, I love the name, so.
Yep. Again, on the hip hop side, originally Jedi Mind Tricks, and then more recently of the group band, whatever, Army of the Pharaohs, hip hop. And then I would also say, and this was like a little after I I think I might have just left Philly, but Amos Lee.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, can't leave him
Wow.
out. I've become friends with him over the years through mutual friends. And,
Very cool.
Yeah. I'm always trying to get him to drink more whiskey, but yeah, it's always fun hanging out when he comes out here. And I went to his last show at Red Rocks and had the opportunity to, it's always nice to have great seats at Red Rocks, but there's the flip side is, while the sound isn't as good, backstage at Red Rocks, to see the crowd and see the energy that the band is, like the back and forth between the band and the crowd, that's amazing. And that's not something that I'm ever privy to. I'm no musician, but it's I like the parallel of watching, well, in this case, Amos Lee and his band just put out that kind of, their artistic endeavor and their energy, and see what's happening in the appreciation of the crowd. It was awesome.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, you could tell him about our show. We could have him on as a guest.
Yeah, he might be there.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
I'll let him know.
No, those are some cool names of bands. I'll have to check those out. Another from Philadelphia, Daryl Hall and John Oates.
Oh yeah. And actually, John Oates lives in Colorado now. He
really?
lives over in Aspen, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, they're an interesting one. They're another one that, like, that was like part of an elementary school, like, soundtrack to life in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were. I had to go through like their discography and like greatest hits. Some really amazing songs, like that I kind of forgot how much I liked, and I had to re-listen to. Like I Can't Go For That, Private Eyes, Out of Touch.
Uh-huh.
I will say, I hate Rich Girl. I would love to erase that
Overdone.
song.
So
Yeah.
overdone.
Yeah, it has been done. It's been done too much, and it's been covered too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
hey, still props to them. Amazing band.
Yeah,
That's one of those that always seems to show up on Touch Tunes somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m.
Yeah.
Somebody got drunk and nostalgic and wanted to hear that song. That's how it goes.
Yeah. I think they're fantastic, incredibly good songwriters. But they really got pissy if you called them Hall & Oates. It's Daryl Hall and John Oates.
Right.
It's not Hall & Oates. And so, okay, that kind of that's disappointing that you would be that pretentious about that. But apparently that was a point of contention for them. 29 top 40 songs. Man, what an amazing catalog of music, and just they're just beautifully composed songs, and they're catchy, and they know how to write a hook. They know how to
absolutely
dig into your head and just get that song to just live there. So I really enjoy them a lot. One more that we'll talk about from Pennsylvania is the band Poison. Anybody got a thought on Poison?
I didn't know they were from Pennsylvania.
Mechanicsburg, if that.
Okay, I know where that is.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think I don't know if any of us have much to say about the hair band genre in general, but it holds an important place. It wasn't my thing.
No.
Yeah, complete ambivalence. I grew up during that whatever reality dating show that Bret Michaels had on MTV.
Yeah.
And everybody that I've ever heard talk to or talk about him and that band from like a media perspective on podcasts says that they're all just absolute tools.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Take them or leave them. Nothing against Pennsylvania bands, Lenny. Sorry, don't mean that in any kind of offense, but I complete ambivalence to me.
Yeah.
There was something about like the hair band persona of like just pure party, over the top indulgence. I think from the sidelines it's entertaining, and even from like this far separated, it's still it was a thing.
Yeah. Let's. I'm not going to try to think about this. I don't want to necessarily remember this going forward, but in a moment, I'll listen to 2 or 3 hair band songs, and then I'm kind of over it.
Yeah.
And Poison, they wrote the song "Every Rose Has Its Thorn," and people will come to me and quote that lyric or sing that lyric, and it's just pure restraint that I don't punch him in the throat.
Is that song in Joe Dirt?
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
I think it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's probably the best.
That one's on my no-fly list when it comes to people that when they come and ask me for covers of certain songs, they're like, "Oh, I've never heard of that. I don't know. I couldn't possibly play that one. Sorry,
I'll look it up.
I'll have to check it out tomorrow." Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Leave a tip, right?
Yep.
Oh, golly. So Pennsylvania is a pretty respectable track record of bands and music. You got a few Rock and Roll Hall of Famers in there, and then some others that have been pretty darn influential when you look at the Roots and 9 Inch Nails. So good stuff. Good home state there, Lenny. So we're gonna get into some more whiskey and talk some about Colorado bands in just a little bit. But before we do that, Lenny, one of the great things about Deerhammer is we can order from you and you will ship to us, right? You can get whiskey, not whiskey, and merch, which I think are the descriptors that are used on the website. So tell people a little bit about how they can order from you.
Yeah. Well, just to get to the point of it, you can visit deerhammer.com and you could do all the things that Kevin just spoke to. It definitely gets more confusing than that, unfortunately. And I'll say again, I will nix the boring things about distilleries for this podcast, save for another. But the short form is we can ship and sell merch, but we cannot ship and sell whiskey to you. Thank you, government. But there is a way that we can make it happen. And I'll save you the details, but you can order from our website and a really awesome company will ship you our whiskey. Someday, maybe we'll be able to ship it to you directly and you'll see my fingerprints on the bottles, but probably see them anyway. So yeah, that's one place that you can get our standard offerings. Another one I suppose worth mentioning, I think a lot of listeners are familiar with sealbox.com, but they're currently, they have in stock. As far as I know, they're still in stock. We've got a really nice single barrel of our hickory smoked corn whiskey. Kevin, you had a bottle of that, I believe.
Oh man, it's so good.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
Delightful.
This bourbon we're drinking, actually, they have that one. And I believe our standard American single malt expression. So sealbox.com, good spot to get some unique Deerhammer as well. And while it's not an online option, I'm hitting the road tomorrow, which might not be tomorrow for those listening, but I'm heading to Missouri. We're actually Deerhammers, we're finally starting to distribute out of Colorado in a more meaningful way.
Fantastic.
So Missouri's first up, and any other, if there's any distributors listening to the show, holler. I'd love to whiskey distributed in other states. But deerhammer.com, great place to start.
Yeah. And you mentioned the hickory smoked corn whiskey. That is just delicious. Again, It's one of those things, start down that path. It requires some discipline to stop.
Yeah, that's a fun one. It's a sleeper because, very quietly, corn whiskey is starting to gain some traction, maybe in bars and, just in general. It doesn't say bourbon, so it doesn't sell as much. But if it was in a new barrel, it'd be bourbon. So it's like the fact that it goes into a used barrel makes it corn whiskey. And I like it. It's a fun one.
Yeah. So we're not drinking corn whiskey tonight. No. But let's talk a little bit about that since we brought it up. Where do you see that going? I think there's some things at play out in the whiskey industry that are going to start pulling more and more product for corn whiskey. What do you think about what's going on there?
Well, I think a few things. I mean, truth be told, this product that we make, this hickory smoked corn whiskey, was designed to be a fairly quick to bottle product, unlike everything else that we were deciding we wanted a minimum 4-year maturation on. And I'll tell you, like that, it's comprised of 100% corn, and we cold smoke 10% of the grain bill with hickory for 6 to 8 hours, then mash and go through the whole process, and it goes into used barrels. But it tastes awesome at 9 months. It just tastes awesome at 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a roundabout way of saying, I am seeing more intrigue and interest in it. It's a little bit of a harder sell again because it doesn't say bourbon to the average person out there who might not be game for saying, hey, I want it all. If it's flavor, I want to try it.
Right.
But bartenders are super game for it. And whether it's for cocktails or just in the same manner that I like to surprise people with, what we make at Deerhammer, I think bartenders like to surprise people with what they're pouring in their glass and sliding across the bar. Yeah. So it's done really well for us there. And we've had to be very deliberate about not talking about it too much because we don't make that much. I mean, we only make like 10 to 20 barrels a year. So, we have to be careful with our stores, and, we can only make so much of any product throughout the year. We just had kind of divvied up, and primarily single malt and bourbon are our main production batches.
Yep. You had mentioned that you're doing that cold smoked process and things like that, and have some 2 to 4 year stocks. Are there any ideas that you could speak to, maybe future forecasting about using that as a seasoning component in some other products?
Do you mean like the barrels that after the whiskey comes out of to be a seasoning product part?
potentially, or just using that corn whiskey and like an American whiskey blend on down the road with some of your rye and your American single malt, things like that.
Yeah, I've been dragging my feet for a solid 8 years on a project that would be, I know it's so long. Distilling does weird things to time, but
I understand.
Yeah, I've had ambitions. I have everything lined up. I have the name. I have this idea of a blend, which would be an American whiskey, and it would certainly have a part in it, and it would all like kind of be married together and matured in whether it be like a foeder or a hogshead, just something that can really let it sit for a while. I would love to do that. We've messed around with it a little bit, but we've never brought it to market. So yeah, I think it's a really neat component. And then on the flip side, back to what I was saying earlier, I do really enjoy pulling the hickory smoked corn whiskey out of the barrels and dropping other things into the barrels. And I just, I'd say unearthed, but like, like our barrels are all stored on like saddle racks and they're not that hard to get to. It's just a day of or a few hours of forklifting. But I found a bunch of single malt barrels that are like not that old, like maybe 2.5 years old, but they were matured in used oak, and 2 of them were matured in third fill barrels. And the last one was hickory smoked corn whiskey before the single malt went in. And they've got a really nice profile. So we'll see where those go in a few more years. But I like that flavoring component as well.
Okay. Wow.
That makes the hair stand up on my arms.
I'm gonna have to come hang out with you and bring a drill and a couple of flasks one of these days.
I mean, that's one of the best things about being only like relatively well organized and not exceptionally well organized. You do forget about we don't really we know what barrels we have here, and it's part of government reporting. But sometimes I forget what we do. So then I'll pull out a room holy crap, that's awesome. Because we always have little handwritten notes on those different ones. Yeah. It's fun.
Well,
very cool.
What you're doing with the corn whiskey though is exceptional. And I hope you have the time to do more with it.
It's it's a fun one. I gotta say, it's a lot of distillers talk about how difficult rye is to make. I dispute that in the sense that I would say rye is messy to make sometimes. But for my system, our corn whiskey is the hardest thing we make. And it's not just because of the grain. It's because the smoking process doesn't really soak up smoke very well. So, 6 to 8 hours of continuously refilling our chamber that holds the wood chips, that's a pain. And filling these, we're again, it's maybe 12 to 1300 pounds of grain. So a few hundred pounds of corn that have to be poured over onto perforated sheet pan racks. And we actually have this weird technique where we alternate where we kind of scrape some to the side so the smoke can make its way through and, kind of go back and forth throughout the chamber. It's the hardest product that we make. Gin's pretty hard too, actually, but I love it. So that's part of it, is enjoying the process or being proud and having pride in the process.
So that was our first part of our show with Lenny. We had a great time talking with him, talking about some bands from Pennsylvania and some of his whiskey. Next week, we're going to be talking about some bands from his current home state of Colorado, a couple more of his whiskeys. So be sure to tune in. Check out Lenny at deerhammer.com. You can order his stuff there online and they will ship to you. So you got no excuse for not getting it. You can also order some merch, some stuff that's not whiskey like gin. So be sure to check that out on social media. You can find him on Instagram at Deerhammer. For Drew, check out his new single Palomino. It is fantastic. Everybody that has listened to it, that I've talked to, said that it's really, really good, and just a really nice step up for him personally, professionally. DrewCrawleyMusic.com to follow along with everything else that he's got coming out. He'll have a new album out late this year, early next year. So I've heard a lot of the stuff off of it. Really, really good stuff. So you don't want to miss that. And as far as our show goes, you can watch us on YouTube. Go over there, hit the subscribe button. We would really appreciate that. That'd help us out a bunch. Share it with your friends. This is a good show. We talk with some fun people. We talk about music that you love or that you will come to love, because we really try to bring the best that we can in terms of our guests and the music that we talk about. If you just want to listen to the show, you can do that on your favorite podcast platform, as long as it's Apple, Spotify, or Google. We have a Facebook page where you can see all the shows. That's where we post all of those. We have a Facebook group where you can go online. You can see what other people in the group are drinking, what they're listening to, and you can share what you're drinking, what you're listening to. Me, right now, I'm out on the lush, plush, and luxurious patio on a beautiful early November evening, sipping on, of course, something from Deerhammer. This hickory smoked corn whiskey is just the bomb. So again, you can order that at deerhammer.com. So until next time, when we'll have Lenny back for part 2 of our show with him, on behalf of Lenny, Drew, and myself, cheers, love, and Freebird. Night, folks.